America's penal system is number one in the world, and America leads in a lot of things. This next picture here from the New York Times really expresses, the fact of, Americanism here. And, we got this great picture here, but, America obviously leads in the world economy. We lead in the military. We lead in the production of cheese, and, we all think France or some European country is the leader of those things. We lead in agriculture exports, and we help the world out in large. We're the number one democracy. We were the first. Some argue whether we're number one, but a lot of other countries have emulated that. But we also lead in the number one in incarceration, and it was back in the day that countries would leave emissaries here to study our judicial system because it was so new, it was so relevant to the times. We don't see those emissaries anymore. And we look at this map here, and we are the crimson red here. And you look at any Axis allies kind of maps or old geography books. Red usually depicts the Axis. Allies are usually those green and other colors. But yet here we are the crimson. We have the most incarcerated people. Ronald Gaynor back in 1985 did a study to see why we had so many incarcerated people. We had such a rise at that time in those 80s. And over the 50 volumes that he went through, books, and 23,000 pages in there, he came up with around about number 3,000. Now he had 12 experts behind him on top of himself. So these 13 lawyers and respected professionals were unable to come to a solid conclusion on how many federal laws, not state laws, but federal laws that would land you in prison, in cuffs, and time in prison. So it was an ultimate failure in their belief and many others' beliefs because it was just unattainable as far as trying to decipher all the coding. When we move forward to today and the 2000s and above, and we looked at an additional 10,000. So we're at 13,000 laws that can put you in cuffs and take you away from your family, your home, and your livelihood. And so when we go through this brief, what I want to focus on here is our comparison in the world and the root causes, beliefs for why we have such a growth in our judicial system here. And this first pie chart here represents, just on the left-hand side here, is our 4%. We represent 4% of the world's population. Not much. It's 350 million. And then on the right-hand side here, it represents how much we have incarcerated in comparison to the world. And we incarcerate, and this is actually closer to 25% here. It's like 24.4% of the world's incarcerated people are here in the United States, and that's a large number. I mean, as such a minority in the world, we lead the way in the people that we imprison, and it's nothing that we've done throughout history. It's actually kind of a recent advent. Only about 30 years old, 40 years old. So when I take our comparisons against other countries in the world, and I have this first one on the left, which is a small country, it's a landlocked country, San Marino, there in Italy, and San Marino represents one incarcerated person in a population of about 30,000. Now the rest of them, as I go from left to right, I got the United States on the far right. We represent 2.6 to 2.8 million incarcerated people. All right, that's one for every 30,000. We definitely go up here. I have Spain, Japan there because we associate a lot with the Spanish and Mexican individuals. And Japan's on the low end, about 59 for every 100,000, and Spain goes up there towards the average, about 159,000 or 159 personnel incarcerated for every 100,000. And UK being the world standard as far as the average goes, is 155 people incarcerated for every 100,000 personnel. Now I throw China on there just as far as population-wise. They represent nearly a fifth of the world's population, yet at 4 times our population, they still only have 1.6 million people incarcerated. And with the regimes and the kind of animosity in the people's belief systems against their judicial system, they still have 1 million plus less people than us. And then I move into Sweden and Russia, and I have them represented up there just for the fact that they have a zero tolerance towards drugs. And so they have that prohibition state that we have. It's very similar to ours. But when you look at their incarceration rate, Sweden has about 59, 78 for every 100,000, and then Russia up there at 577 for every 100,000. And Russia only has about 0.68 million, 700,000 people. in prison at this time. They have a lower population than us. But if you take Russia, United States, and China, put them together, we represent more than half of the world's prison population. It's an interesting fact. So we move on to the causes of our incarcerated people in the United States. And I bring up this photo of Billie Holiday. He was a reverend who was part of the tolerance movement, back in the 1920s and 30s, actually even before then. But he was an evangelicus who had a lot of sway with the populace back then. Religion had a little bit more play on the movement. And he stated, after the passing of Prohibition, the 18th Amendment, he says, his optimistic prediction was going to be, the reign of the tears is over, the slums will soon be a memory, we will turn our prisons into factories and our jails into storehouses and corn cribs. Men will walk upright now, the women will smile, and the children will laugh. Hell will forever be in rent. And, Mr. Sunday, he had nothing but optimistic, and all the people that backed up the tolerance movement, they had a very optimistic view of what the world would be without alcohol, and there's nothing wrong with that, but there's that human nature in there that, kind of throws it off. And those temperance, reformers, they had a lot of claims in there, and, as we study this little character here that's going on, they had a belief that, it wasn't human nature so much to cause all these problems with disease and poverty and crime. It was tied to intemperance, or, the consumption of alcohol. So they had this very coarse, strength or belief in there, and this goes way back to the foundation of America and the intolerance that people had for alcohol. And I'm not arguing that these cause problems or nothing like that, but that was their belief system, that hey, there was a one means fix for a lot of the social problems that America had at that time, was let's get rid of alcohol, cause it. And we come to the reality of it, and we have a great picture of Al Capone here. Most people understand that Al Capone was a leader of the underworld when it came to. So their picture messed up, but he was a strong leader in the underworld for dealing with alcohol and built a great underworld. And Mark Thornton, a professor of economics from Auburn University, he starts putting these numbers together, and we're reading on there on the left-hand side, after the Volstead Act came into place, which gave teeth or bite to the 18th Amendment as far as putting people in there. It started leading to the studies, and they had 30 American major cities that were put under studies for this, and it came out, they showed an increase in crimes and treasure spent on enforcement, overall. But when we look at, the more money spent, there was a great growth in the police force, just standardized police force in the cities and the states. And, not to mention we had the FBI, come about thanks to Prohibition. They had to, battle what was perceived as criminals of the day. And these people were horrible people by all means, but, possibly grown from things. But they go into more, kind of economics over that, and they say, hey, if we outlaw this stuff, it will obliterate, drunkenness and rowdiness in the street, and it'll all go away. But it did the opposite effect of it. With more police on there, and now we had more reasons to incarcerate people. We had a great increase. So we look at the drunkenness, just the public display drunkenness, or the public disorder, and they had a 40% increase in this. Drunk driving, vehicles were kind of new, so that might just been their driving ability that made them look drunk. But they had an 81% increase in drunk driving, and I think that number might be skewed a little bit just because driving in general was kind of new to everybody. So maybe people didn't even think that drinking and driving was a bad thing. You operated a horse kind of fine back then. And we look at crimes with victims, theft and burglaries. They increased by 9%, while homicide and batteries increased by 13%. And so overall, there was a great increase in crimes, and not all of them violent. a lot of them were just placed on the fact that possession of alcohol, transport of alcohol, and bring these things in the country were criminal indictments at the time. And the thought was a good outcome, and then it had unintended consequences, and it's aligned with today's prohibition. And we look at the benefits of it, or the benefiters of it, being the bootleggers and the crime bosses, the drug cartels, and he represents a lot of what we see in modern day society. And obviously, we had a growth in government. Ultimately, the 18th Amendment was repealed by the 21st Amendment by President Roosevelt, and abolished that. And now we move into the modern day prohibition, and to a lot of people's belief, it's really not that modern of an idea. The prohibition started, we'll say around the 1860s, and it became part with efforts to regulate what pharmaceuticals put on their products and sold to people right there. And we kind of look at this, and we have alcohol, cannabis, and chloroform on there, and that stuff wasn't represented there. The government was seeing that, hey, the people had a right to know what they were being used with that. And we continue on to the next one, and I'm just going to highlight some points from here. We look at the Pure Food and Drug Act, and that was an important one. So even if it wasn't being sold as a medicine for people, they were still throwing opium in there, cannabis and things like that. And when the public knowledge starting to know about it, they actually seen a 33% decrease in the use of these products just by the public being aware of it. And that's what they've drawn from it. And the little bar graph on the side just kind of says the natural versus synthetic products. And obviously, as we come into the modern day age, we see a large rise in synthetics, because laboratory drugs are the new norm that we see, not so much as the natural. And it's kind of a common thing. One natural thing gets outlawed, we have 4 unnatural things to go ahead and put it down. We move more into the modern day, and we a lot of people can associate with reefer madness and seeing when our marijuana was outlawed and we came up with the marijuana tax, and it was a tax that wasn't attainable. You're supposed to get a tax stamp, and you were allowed to grow marijuana and sell it, but it was unachievable. It was just there in theory as a way to control it. And they just like the Volstead Act, they passed acts. They had these Daniels Acts, the Boggs Acts, and the Controlled Substance Acts, the CSA, and all these acts gave teeth to prosecutors. And they went from doubling to quadrupling to 8 times the minimum sentencing or mandatory sentencing or the allowed sentencing. So all these things just gave tougher and tougher sentencing. Never really addressing the cause of addiction and drug use or anything like that. And now we start, moving into the modern day. We understand the war on drugs, and we see, 1979, and we are seeing this increase right here. This is kind of neat, and it runs in line with it. 1979. We had this legal drug use peak, but that kind of pushed the CSA to be passed, that Controlled Substance Act. Once we've seen those numbers, and Nixon at the time was pushing for it, it actually didn't get passed for another year in 1971. From that previous page, I'm sorry, 1970 to 1971. But 1971, Nixon declares the war on drugs. 79 legal drug use peaks. We still weren't using those Boggs Acts and the Daniel Acts. It just wasn't the main issue. Well, we have Ronald Reagan coming at this time, and I'm a fan of him. But the administration founded the Anti-Drug Abuse Act and gave the money and the focus to the enforcements at the time to really start cracking down on drug abuse. And and this is where modern prohibition takes a turn. And we can easily see on this graph, in the 1980s to 1990s here, we have a substantial increase in incarcerated rates. And this will go into the kind of the reasonings that we see the modern numbers for the incarceration rates that we have. And we have these 4 reasons up here, and they're pretty explanatory looking at them, we have mandatory sentence, prison privatization, popular votes for drugs, and immigration. And they all kind of tie into each other for one another. So we look at, mandatory sentencing, and it's a relevantly new idea as far as incarceration in terms of people throughout history. It's usually a conceptual idea to put somebody away. There's the human factor is always involved. Well, mandatory sentencing took away the human factor. It says, if you did A, then the result's going to be B, and C's the cards are going to be dealt with for the rest of your life. So, I went over the Daniels Act and the Boggs Act, the CSA, and now we get to the anti-drug use with the Anti-Drug Abuse Act with the Ron administration. And one of the largest ones that came up about this mandatory sentencing was, crack cocaine and simple possession. It had 5 years. 5 years. No questions asked. Minimum 5 years. This wasn't that you pulled a gun on somebody or you're mistreating your kids out there. You have possession of it. Maybe you got persuaded by your peers or something like that. It didn't matter the reasoning behind it. There was no rationale behind it. The fact that you had it, you were 5 years in prison, and so starts the cycle of prison. But we look at that with a couple with the war on drugs, and at the beginning of 1985, we had 41,000 people getting incarcerated for drugs. By the end of 2010, we're looking at 500,000 people a year getting incarcerated just for drugs, and that brings in the minority, and this character right here places it there. It's not specific to everybody. It's really specific to the race, and kind of continues to drive that divide that we have in the United States today. And one of the closest arguments we have as far as saying, hey, we have to maintain this drug abuse is comparison, for one, what we see relevant in our lives today. Nobody looks at the positives that we see or what doesn't really matter in our life as far as drug abuse goes. We look at the negatives. And when we look at bill offers and legislation, it really drives into the fact. The only comparison they have on that is the downward social spiral that we had with China and precursor to the Opium Wars with Britain. Prison privatization. Prior to the 1980s, it didn't exist, and a lot of arguments on there as far as the danger of this. These people run one of the largest forums for legislation and private sector members, but they contribute to the American Legislative Exchange Council, and it's a major organization that collaborates with modeling bills and legislation there. So it's kind of a process, and they have it up here as the prison industrialization complex. The prisoners for profit, and I don't think it needs a lot of explanation, but there, just because anytime there's money that can be made, things can be skewed, especially when there's no cap to it. And the oversight on there it's a new system. It's only 30 years old now. But these people engage our lawmakers and everything like that at a very high level. Then we go into judges elected by a popular vote, and that's always been the status quo in America, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just now you have judges tied with a political agenda, and now they have to maintain a connection with the people based on what's being fluid. All right, and in America, nothing's supposed to change at the drop of a dime, and it shouldn't be that way. Just because if you enact change swiftly all the time, you have a tendency to have undue consequences without trying to see minor changes in the influence. And that goes with the judges being elected. Is that an official being elected, he has to go with what's in the YouTube of the day or the New York Times of the day or anything like that, and they're swayed by that popular vote. So they don't, like most countries, are protected by it. So with drugs being the issue of the day or immigration being the issue of the day, they have to be hard on that because that's what America's associated with justice, and that's what they see on the CNNs, the Fox News, and BBC America, and everything like that. Immigration, and this is a subject that can have its own section in here, really, but it's also increased, and it's really kind of a relative thing. It's overtaken drugs, prohibition, alcohol, and those kind of natures things, as far as the number one reason why people are incarcerated in America. And but it's also in line with it because when we look at the immigration cause, and it's it's a little closer to almost 40 something percent, 43%, 42% of the incarcerated people in prison today. But you know, when I add these percentages together, I don't include violent criminals or people that are part of immigration that were part of, you know, violent enterprises. These are people that were incarcerated just for one, being in the United States for illegal entry or remaining in the United States, you know, without authority past their visa and it expired, anything like that. And you know, that's 32% of the federal crimes is immigration. You add the two together between immigration and prohibition, and we're well over 50%. And you know, and I want to state again, is these are not violent crimes. These are really honestly people either trying to make an easy dollar or easy way of life, enjoy themselves with recreational drug use, and or trying to make it in America and make a better way for themselves. And it brings me on to my final thought here. And in conclusion, Americans are proud to be the leaders in the world, you know, for many things, whether it's economically, politically, socially, and you know, few things bring this to our news every day in life, and it's just, you know, a common thing that we've accepted in our life as far as the many people that we have in prison in the world, or in the United States alone. And it's a norm that our society has accepted, and we brush it under the rug. And you know, it affects our underprivileged, underclass, and they're susceptible to the when they're enrolled in this prison system of incarceration to have few options on getting out. You know, these people can't recover from it. And I have, you know, Ludwig von Mises up here, and he put a lot of sayings, and he you know, capitalized on another thing, and he wrote after the conclusion of the prohibition, he's like, once the principle is admitted that it is the duty of the government to protect the individual against his own foolishness, no serious objections can be advanced against further encroachments. And he's simply saying that if we start allowing the government to move in on our personal actions, you know, what we deem as right and wrong in our own head or our own community, then, you know, what is it for the government to move in on other, you know, perceptions of life? And that, you know, can be open to debate to whether it's the art that we look at, the way we enjoy ourselves in our meantime. You know, if we allow these doors to open for government to enforce these rules and not social order, self-social order, you know, government will ultimately, you know, run the day-to-day lives of ourselves. So, you know, that's my brief for incarceration in America. Thank you for your time.